Chris, thank you. I'm a big fan of NFIB's work nationally, and Iowans for tax relief here, and the national work that they've done as well. I want to talk for a moment about how we got here on taxes and spending. There is on a number that should be on all the tables, this chart, belongs on your refrigerator. It is here from 1932 to 1994. You see up here the Senate was Democrat, complete control Democrat, except for 10 of 62 years. On the bottom, the House was run by the Democrats for all but 4 of 62 years. This is how we got to where we are. There was only 4 years in the entire 62-year period where the Republican Party had the House and the Senate, once when Truman was president, once when Eisenhower was president. During this period, there were 2 years, two-year periods, 1934 to 36, New Deal, 1964 to 66, Great Society. During those 4 years, half of the federal government was constructed. Half of federal spending flows from entitlements, pieces of legislation, in 4 years. Those happened when there were supermajority votes. Almost 80% of the House and Senate was run by Democrats in 34. They proceeded, as you see from the strong line, to collapse their support after passing it. And then the same thing happened after the New Deal, but they stayed. The bill stayed. So we didn't decide as a country over a 100-year period, let's have bigger and bigger government. We actually had 2 lunges at the taxpayers' throats, and you saw government, big redwoods planted, which then stayed and squeezed out both defense spending in the government, but also spending by families and individuals and neighborhoods here. What happened in '94 was that was the first year that the Republicans in the House and Senate, 90+% of them, signed the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. This is the pledge that we offer to all Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to everybody, the state legislators, governors, congressmen, president. And it's a simple pledge. I will vote against any net tax increase. It's not a promise to cut taxes. It's not a promise to support every tax cut anybody's ever invented. No net tax increase. Government at the federal, state, and local level is too big now. It should not be getting bigger. Let's reform the government we have so it costs less and people have an opportunity to run their own lives rather than have somebody else run them for them. Since '94, when the Republicans, there were a number of Democrats who took the pledge, 5 in the House, 2 in the Senate. They all switched parties, so they're not all Republicans. But since '94, we have had not a single Republican has voted for a tax increase, and no tax increase is passed unless the Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They did for 2 years under Clinton. They raised taxes. 2 years later, they lost the House and Senate. People were so scared by the assault on all sorts of freedom. And then when Obama had House and Senate, also for 2 years, he had all sorts of taxes and regulations, gas taxes and others. And you saw they lost the House immediately and the Senate shortly thereafter. Since the Republican Party became the party that would not raise your taxes, it has had the House and Senate for 2 out of 3 years. Not 1 out of 15, 2 out of 3. And that's the change that's taken place. The Republican Party may still invade small countries they can't pronounce. That was in 2006. We lost the House and the Senate for a couple of years, but then back on track. So they're not arguing for perfection, but as the party that will not raise your taxes, it changed. We now have 2 parties. There's not a single Democrat in Congress or the House that will not raise your taxes, and given every chance they have. And there's not a single Republican who will vote for net tax increases in Washington, D.C. And so that, we've now divided into 2 political structures. Didn't have to be in the parties, it just happens to be with the American political structure. They are within the 2 parties, and they're looking to go in different directions, which is why when somebody talks to you about bipartisan compromise, like the good old days, they're telling you how old they are. When Nixon was president, he wanted the government to get bigger. and Ted Kennedy. I'm originally from Massachusetts prior to emigrating to the United States. And my family stayed. And Nixon wanted the government to get bigger, and Ted Kennedy wanted to get much bigger. And so they would compromise each budget year on bigger. A little bit bigger versus, and then Nixon would go, not as big as they wanted, I helped you, and Kennedy would go bigger than they wanted, but somehow the government got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just drifted leftward, because now today you have at least people in the House and Senate, the President, who said, I think at some point we need to reform government to cost less. Not more, less. Not do less in terms of accomplishing legitimate goals, but we do not need to be spending as much money. Some of what tax dollars are spent are counterproductive rather than productive. When somebody wants bigger government, less government, what would a compromise look like? Right? If it gets bigger, somebody just lost. When we cut taxes, somebody just lost. It's not a compromise on those issues, because on the big mega issue of how big the government should be, there's a difference. But what this also means is you actually have an honest discussion about the size of government and what government can and shouldn't do, the scope of government, and that has changed the nature of politics, and I think made it much more honest in the United States today. It's clear what's going on as for taxes. Then it brings us up to the more modern past, more modern day. We have President Trump, who, along with the Republican House and Senate, passed a rather significant tax cut. We're all familiar with it. Took the corporate rate from 35% down to 21%. He wanted 15, we got 21%. The original Republican request was let's take it down to 20. Then we'd been at 28 when we compromised. So let's start at 15. We got 35 up down to 21. At 35, we had the highest corporate income tax in the world. Communist China was at 25%. We were higher than Communist China in how we taxed businesses. We had a higher tax than France. Stupider in France is not where we want to do tax policy. Ireland was 12.5 and doing fine. Okay, and so the rate came down, and we've seen significant growth as a result, and a whole series of reforms that flowed through that tax reform. There will be tax reform part 2, and this is what is coming up now and being discussed. I give you some sense of where I think it is. The House and the Senate and the White House are all working together. There may be the middle rate, the 15% rate, may come down a point or two. We may lengthen. Who pays the 15% rate as opposed to higher rates? The per-child tax credits, all of the tax cuts of the Republican Trump tax cut that focused on families and individuals may become made permanent. The Democrats would not allow them to be out for more than 10 years. We need to revisit that like we did with Obama and make them permanent for everybody. Love to do that before the election to give Democrats a chance to vote to make the middle-class family tax cuts permanent. We'll see if they really want that. Right now, they've all announced, every single Democrat running for president has announced that they want to repeal the entire Trump Republican tax cut, which means for a family of 4, earning direct median income for a family of 4, about $70,000, a $2,000 tax increase per year on that family. Never mind the lower cost than having corporate rates down, but the direct personal income tax that family sees. Single parent, middle income, single parent earning about $40,000 gets a $1,300 tax cut from the tax bill direct, in addition to lower rates from lower taxes on businesses. That $1,300 tax increase on that single parent with 1 child, as soon as the Democrats get rid of the tax cut. You saw recently the study over the last decade with fracking. The cost of energy has gone down by $1 trillion over the last decade. $1 trillion. That is, and every single Democrat is out there talking about ending fracking, banning fracking. Fracking, the President Obama tried to stop fracking and did weakened it for oil exploration, energy exploration on federal land, but he couldn't get in the way of state and local land, and that's where the fracking revolution happened, despite this best opposition. And now the other Democrats have come along and said we can't be having this low carbon, lower cost energy in the country, and this must be stopped. But that's $1 trillion, it's not a tax cut, but it's $1 trillion drop in the cost of living for the American people across the board. The world has changed with a handful of strong, serious tax and regulatory changes in Washington, D.C., out in the states. Now, one of the great things about Iowans for tax relief and NFIB at the state level is that you don't have to wait for Washington to move. You can change policy in America with a good idea in one state, starting in one state. Term limits, which swept the nation, started as an initiative in one state and then to many of the states. And the reason why we've term limit committee chairs in Washington, D.C. was they saw how successful it had been at the state level, and term limits moved to Washington. Transparency started in Texas, where the governor of Texas, Rick Perry, said, well, we're going to put every check that my office, the governor's office, writes, every contract we sign online, and anybody can go look at it. And then the comptroller put the rest of Texas on, and then they passed a law to say nobody can undo this, so that all checks, all contracts in Texas, Missouri followed, Kansas followed, state by state. Many states have followed that. The one state that's refusing is California. They said they can't find their checks and stuff. So they're not cooperating. The Democrat mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, when he got elected, opened up all the books of his predecessors so that all the sins could be known and has not let you look at anything else since. So that's sort of selective transparency, but that's better than nothing. And this is a project line state by state. Openthebooks.com is the website where you can go and see how much of Iowa's on and what's available state and local. Openthebooks.com is the whole national setup, federal and state. Actually, Coburn, the very conservative Republican senator from Oklahoma, and Barack Obama, in the only piece of legislation he co-sponsored when he was actually in the House and Senate, we got it passed. We got it passed. And we got some federal transparency, and then the Bush administration at the time did more. That's not law. We need to make it law, so it can't be undone. But some real progress there. So, as you and Iowa look to do projects on occupational licensing, other states are looking at this. This is something that's really getting a lot of support, making it easier for people to move from one state to another. It started years ago in discussion about spouses of people in the military. Men and women whose spouses were moving around because of the military from one base to another, and somebody's license to do a particular job didn't translate. You had to spend months and months and a lot of money to get the new license, and then you're off to the next base. So this is a project that's going state by state. You saw Right to Try also move state to state. This is the FDA hasn't approved a drug yet, but they've proved it's safe, but they haven't yet decided if it's effective. And it can take them another 5 years to decide that it's effective and it should be legal to sell, and you're dying in 3 for what you have. We went state, and the FDA for years said, we don't care. We don't care. And we were getting nowhere in Washington. And state by state, 40 states passed laws that said, regardless of what the FDA says, we say it's legal here. And eventually, Washington passed a law, almost unanimously. The Democrat Pallone in New Jersey tried to stop it at the end of the day, didn't. And it passed. This could never have passed in Washington, D.C. Never, because the FDA, whenever somebody would say, how about if you speed things up or get this reformed, or, Switzerland's been doing this for 10 years and nobody's dying, maybe we could, learn from, no, and then they do this at you and say, thalidomide, and then everybody faints and runs back down the hill. And we were never able to get any reform at all. State successes are the best way to teach Washington what to do on these things. Proposition 13, the significant cut in property taxes, and there allowed Kemp Roth, the income tax cut in Washington, D.C., to understand, hey, this is popular, this works, the world doesn't end when this happens. The spending limits that Colorado had for many years, and they just put on the ballot, the Democrats wanted to finish Tabor, which was it's said spending can't go above, the growth of spending by the state can't go higher than population growth plus inflation, and if you get more money than that, you have to give it back as a tax cut. And the Democrat governor there got together and they said, we really need to kill this thing. It's just killing us. We don't have any money to waste. And so they put on the ballot to blow it up so that the government could spend as much money as it took, whatever it wanted. And it was voted down. Blue, purple, Colorado, Democratic House, Senate, governorship, voted down, and it's there. And now everybody's going to get a $500 rebate because revenue's coming in beyond the cap, and Governor Polis is out explaining about his rebate. He changed teams on a dime on that issue. He'll be back at our throat the next time he gets a chance, but the idea of a spending restraint over time, Colorado has shown that for dozens of years this has worked well, and it's one of the things that allowed the sequester to hold down spending. Remember, Obama wanted $1.4 trillion in higher taxes, and this is the budget deficit deal, okay, that we were going to have back in 2012, 2013. And Senator Kerry of, not Nebraska, but Senator Kerry of Massachusetts ran into me in the halls of the Senate and said, Grover, I want to talk to you, we're really close, could you talk to Republicans? And I said, what do you want? He said, well, we want $1.4 trillion in higher taxes and $400 billion in more spending. This is a deficit reduction package, $400 billion in more spending. And we're going to put those together, and I think we've really got something there. And I told him I'd do my best. Anyway, 90+% of the Republicans in the House and the Senate had signed the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, never to raise taxes. There were a handful of people who had impure thoughts for moments here and there, but nobody acted on these impure thoughts, so that was good. And we said to Obama, the Democrats, we're not raising taxes, we're going to reform government. And that's when we got the sequester. Spending went from 24% of GDP down to 20% of GDP, simply by not going on spending sprees. We also took the $1 trillion. The first thing Obama did when he became president was to announce the war in Afghanistan was never going to end and would cost $100 billion a year forever, and put it into the budget, which meant when the war in Afghanistan ended, all that money was his to play with because it was in the budget. One of the things that Bush did that was very wise was he never put Afghanistan and Iraq in the budget. It was never permanent money. It was always emergency money. We're not going to be there forever. This is not, a $100 billion increase in the budget now forever. And as soon as Obama came, he said, yes, we are. It's all in the budget forever. We took that out and then another billion on top of that and brought spending down. 2.0. One of the things they're looking at also is 401ks, IRAs, all the various ways to make it easier for Americans to save. If I had to bet, looking ahead, I believe this next election will be the 401k election. I believe that the 100 million 401ks in the country, the 50 million IRAs, and the millions of people who have everything from ABLE to 529s and the various savings programs understand that whichever the Democrats is running for president, and they all basically are heading in the same direction, just at different speeds. But they're all heading that way, bigger, much bigger, and start with a $2 trillion tax increase by getting rid of the Republican tax cuts and significant cuts on many middle-class Americans directly as well as on their jobs. But if they're going to punch the 1%, they're going to make the Kennedy kids pay somehow. First, they step on your 401k because when they decide they're going to reduce the value of companies by taxing companies and making the returns on any company less, any business less, and the stock market goes down, not temporarily as with this flu thing, but takes it down because you permanently changed the value of a company. If the corporate rate goes back up to 35, it's not worth as much as it was at 21% forever. It's not something that, oh, that'll come back. No, it won't. You just changed the value of the firm and all the regulations. I think that the recovery we've seen, the growth we've seen, the jobs we've seen are half tax cut, half deregulation. The dramatic deregulation of energy and in a lot of the other efforts where this administration said we're not doing some of the crazy irregular labor law that would really gone hard left undid that, and that loosened up and freed up much of the economy, and then the lower taxes as well. Together, Reagan's recovery and Reagan's growth was very similar. Dramatic reduction in regulations, significant cuts in marginal tax rate. Together, that gave you growth. Sometimes people see one but not the other. I think it's very important to understand both have worked together. And even if the Democrats re-elected the president and failed to win the House, save the Senate, save the Senate, save the Senate, write a memo to yourself, save the Senate, very important. Some senators more important than others, but the Senate in general. The important one here was we have a real opportunity as we move forward to explain to the American people every idea, write down a list of every idea that Biden, the moderate, or Bernie Sanders, or any of these guys who all have basically the same resume, a collection of resumes that they would appoint to office. You know, their Rolodex, they only got one Rolodex. They may pretend to be different human beings, and they may in some sense be different people, but in terms of their policies, it's marginal, and the people they would appoint into judges, and the people they would appoint into the various departments to regulate your life for you, because they're smarter and better than you are, that those are the same people, and there's not much difference. But every idea they have, write it down, will make your 401k smaller, will make your IRA smaller and weaker. And every significant proposal that the modern Republican Party has put forward, possible exception of tariffs, will make your 401k larger and more robust and more sustainable, if I can borrow a phrase. So this is, you're looking at more than half the country that has a 401k and IRA equivalent, not 1%, more than 50%. Everybody benefits from a better economy because of jobs and opportunity. But just looking at 401ks and IRAs and those things, there you're seeing a dramatic choice. You go with Trump and the Republicans, your 401k will get larger. Your life savings, they like to attack wealth. Wealth is what people who have more money than you have, they have wealth. I have life savings. Other people have wealth. When they want to tax wealth, they mean your life savings. And they cannot hit the Kennedy kids without stepping on you first. And I think that is a very easy point to make. I think you'll see that is why ideas like Senator Portman has put forward on IRAs and 401k expansion, people in the House and the White House as well. The other one I'd take a look at is the effort to index the capital gains to inflation. There is an argument, the Supreme Court tells us, that you can define cost as cost plus inflation. They decided that in 2002, FCC v. Verizon, and they said the agency could simply say, when we say cost, we mean real cost. Cost plus inflation. The Supreme Court might say, could be historic cost, what you pay for it, could be real cost, take out inflation, could be replacement cost. If I need another truck, that's a cost. You decide what cost means there. And the IRS could simply do, and the President has several times said he wants to do this. You may see it next week, you may see it after he gets reelected, but on the list of things to do is either by executive order or legislation, if we win the Congress back, to index the cost basis of capital gains to inflation. Right now, 40% of what people pay in capital gains taxes when they sell shares of stock is inflation, on average. That means if you've been holding it for 10, 20, or 30 years, it's a lot more than 40%, because last week, next to nothing, okay? Land, $7 trillion in corporate assets would change hands in about 2 years, because people, the companies, hold on to property for a very long time. AT&T has land and buildings 100 years old. Imagine trying to sell any of that stuff. The hit you pay, you're just paying the cost of inflation on that. This would tremendously help the economy. Watch for it as we move forward. I think it's going to be one of the interesting things. When you look at the polling data, the one that moves gettables, people who don't like Trump or the Democrats, so they're gettable, those are the people you need to get to carry in this election. As we did in the last election, the thing that moves them most is indexing capital gains taxes, so you don't pay tax on inflation, to strengthen your 401k. Now, I'm not sure which half of that sentence moves them, but I'll include them both because it seems to be what they tested. But indexing capital gains for inflation will do tremendous things for your 401k and the general economy as well. So Going forward, there'll be tax cuts 2.0. There'll be a lot of ideas. I think as you have, Iowa is looking at income tax reduction. I think that's an extremely good idea. We're looking at North Carolina has over the last 10 years taken their corporate rate from 7.5% to 2.5%. Their individual rate from about 7% down to 5%, and then hollowed out the 5%, a lot of deductions and credits. So it's a tremendous reduction in the individual rate, but they've done it not just with the top rate. And they've done that by saying, we have some money, we're going to cut the corporate rate permanently and or the personal rate permanently. And by the way, when revenue reaches this new number, we're going to take the corporate rate down, the individual rate down permanently. So they've bent down the cost. It's actually a spending limit, because you say how much you plan to spend. When revenue comes above that, here's the number. And it also means it's very safe. A governor or state legislature doesn't have to say, well, I'm going to cut taxes in 3 years. Well, you don't know what's going to happen in 3 years. So, okay, revenue will go down and be triggered to cut when revenue hits this number, which we're not at now. And when it gets to that number, then the tax cut takes place. And so you never end up with deficits or any sort of confusion about what's going on. And they've taken that, and every year they've not got a $3 billion surplus in North Carolina. Simply because when they take the rates down, they get more growth, and they keep taking that. Now they have a Democratic governor who won't help them cut taxes, but they're not giving them money to spend either. Very solid legislature in North Carolina. I was just meeting with the governor and the legislative leaders in Arizona. They're looking to do the trigger to say, our goal is to phase out the income tax, and we're just going to do it a tenth of a point, a couple tenths of a point at a time. Every time we hit one of these triggers, the rates will keep going down until we get to zero. And by announcing you're going to zero, everybody planning to invest in your state is investing in the future. You don't move to a state and build something for 10 years. You want to know that the next 50 years look good. And so the direction a state's taxes have is more important than the actual total spending now. If spending and revenue, if spending and taxes are going down as a percentage of the economy, you're better off than a more competently run state at present whose plans are to go up. Because people go, if I'm going 50 years, I want to be in the one that's getting control of their spending, control of their taxes, and that it's going down. And where the people have committed to taking the corporate rate to zero and or the individual rate down towards zero as well. So there's some real opportunities at the state level to make radical and dramatic change, but very safely with the triggers, because you don't end up getting surprised somehow with a recession. If you have a recession and you didn't hit the trigger, then the tax cut doesn't come. But when revenue comes in, we have strong economic growth. One of the challenges, we have Reagan cuts taxes, revenue goes up, and Democrat governors in New York and California spend it and go, aren't I great? Okay? Because he created, with lower federal taxes, revenue which then they spend as if this was going to last forever and continue to grow that way. And they lock in all the spending, and then when there's a downturn sometime in the future, they go, well, we got to raise taxes because we're certainly not going to cut spending. So watch for opportunities that other states have done. There's some very good examples of where this has happened. And Iowa is a flat state except for this corporate income tax thing you have. It's like this tent pole that the whole rest of the world can see. I don't know that anybody else is quite as high as Iowa's corporate rate. But both corporate and individual are high. I'm from Massachusetts. We have 5.1% maximum individual rate, 5.1%. It's flat rate tax. And I would strongly recommend on any taxes, federal, state, local, that you look at a single rate tax has an advantage. What is it? The single rate tax advantage is when a politician wants to raise it, he has to look everybody in the state in the eye. Look at all of you guys in the eye, and I got this really good idea, and you're all going to pay for it. And everyone goes, and it really better be really good, tell us about it. And in Massachusetts, 5 times, blue, Democrat, liberal, Ted Kennedy in Massachusetts, they put on the ballot, let's go to a graduated income tax. Let's go to a progressive income tax. And 5 times it's been voted down. Because people said, you know what? And they would actually write bills. First year, we're only going to tax the Kennedy kids. And yeah, and year 2, you'll come for me. No. It's a fairly sophisticated argument that people looking out, yeah, year 1, you're actually going to cut my taxes. That's fun. Year 2, the Kennedy kids won't help us when you come for me. So the flat tax, politicians love the Richard Speck theory of tax increases. You don't want to take on everybody in the room at once, you take them out one at a time. We don't want to let them do that. Some people remember Richard Speck. Thank you. You want to make them face everybody at once and say yes or no. Because remember what was Clinton's argument? I'm only going to tax 2%. The rest of you may want to step out of the room. This isn't going to be pleasant, make it loud, but it's only them. It's not you. And then you come back in the room and he's passed a gas tax on everybody that you missed because you thought he was only going to mug them. Why is the left talking about taxes on the rich? Why is the left talking about taxes on the rich? There's no money to be had for taxing people on the rich. Every time we cut the top marginal tax rate, we get more money, not less. Okay, so they know that. We cut the corporate rate, we get more money, not less, from economic growth. They know that. So they're not going. But they talk about that because they don't want you to notice the other hand is in your back pocket of the middle class. That's where the cash is. I'm not worried about Cuba or Venezuela. I am worried about France and Germany and Sweden and Denmark in the minds of our friends, the left-wing characters running for president, when they say, we want to be like that. Okay? What's it mean to be like that? I kind of like Sweden has no minimum wage. Sweden has no death tax. Sweden has been cutting their taxes recently. They've actually been moving away from stupid, having gone into stupid in a big way in the 70s. My relatives are from Sweden, and they told me they ran out of food, so we left. So anyway, I've never got weepy about this old country thing. Okay? Granddad said it sucked. It sucks. But evidently, they've gotten so much better on taxes, so that's why it's standing. Oh, they have complete school choice. Complete school choice in Sweden. This is, when the socialists say we want to be like Sweden, really? Can we have school choice? That'd be nice. Can we, no. Anyway. But what they do have in Europe that's different from us is that if you're family of 4 or 2 kids, your income tax rates in these social democratic countries are 10, 20, and in some cases 30% higher than the US. Middle income. Not that much difference in how you tax rich people. They have a value-added tax, which is a French word for big government. And the value-added tax is a sales tax at every level of production, 20% opening bid for people who live in Europe, 25% Sweden, okay? What's your sales tax in various states and so on? Okay, it would go to 20 from wherever it is now for middle income and low income and every income person. And for the middle income, your income tax rate and overall burden, because they have income taxes and then they have wage taxes to pay for all the free stuff that you're going to get after they've taken their commission and given some of it back to you. So the difference between the United States and Europe, the European social democracies, is how heavily they tax the middle class, how heavily they tax everybody, and energy taxes, right? You ever try and buy gasoline in Europe? They try and fool you by selling not gallons, but the little teeny things, what do they call it, not quarts, but liters, right? They call it, oh, it's only $3, $4 a liter. Oh, we've had prices that high in the United States. No. It's this thing, it's the liter thing, it's not the gallon thing. They're not fooling me. And then, oh, you get a lot of mileage too, kilometers. That said, the model they're talking about is a model of massive tax hikes on the middle class to pay for this stuff. And the only reason they do the tax the rich thing is magicians get up and do this and this. And, in the back of the room, there's this, they're always trying to get you to look not at what they're doing. Okay, politicians who want to raise your taxes play the same game. That's what they're doing when they say tax the 1%. And the proof of that is ask what their position is on the 1%, and then ask what that would do to your life savings. Questions, thoughts, arguments?
We collected questions from the audience ahead of time, and you've actually hit on all of them. There was, they cared about taxes, and I think you covered that. You and I talked about some things yesterday too that we're going to go ahead and share and send out to our members, especially on some of the education fund and the local government front. I know you pointed us in the right direction. So, but in the interest of time, we want to make sure Senator Ernst gets a chance to come up as well. I have a sense she may address a couple of these things you've talked about anyway, so it's probably a good handoff. So we appreciate you coming here. We appreciate you talking to our legislative leaders and to our collective membership. So could we give a round of applause to Greg? Now I want to bring up former Representative Walt Rogers to introduce our next speaker.